And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a great pleasure to be with you again on this program. Not only because it is always a great pleasure to come together with you to bring a conversation that I hope will fascinate and entertain as well as educate, but it's also the subject matter because it's part of what I do as what I like to refer to. They call me Dr. D, okay? I'm an audio physician. What does that mean? I do archival work, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the context of what we're going to be talking about. And that happens to be a book, a wonderful book called From Hollywood to the World. It is a rediscovered recordings by pianist and conductor José Iturbi in a richly illustrated 16 CD book edition. Now, when you hear CD, you're going, huh? I thought everything was up on the internet in the cloud. Well, it probably is, but it's in CD, but you also have a hardcover book that you can look through and see some of the incredible pictures that I have seen of José Iturbi as well as others in this wonderful compendium. And Donelle Dadigan is my guest. She is the goddaughter of MGM music legend José Iturbi, along with Grammy-nominated icon Michael, is it Feinstein or Feinstein?
Feinstein.
Thank you for, Donelle, thank you for being with us today. I love the fact that you're here.
Well, thank you for having me, Richard, and for all of your listeners and viewers. My name is Donelle Dadigan, and everyone calls me Dee Dee, so it's all good.
All right, Dee Dee. Well, it fascinates me because there are more recordings in various platforms out there, hidden in basements, in attics, in walls, for all we know, around the world that may never get heard because they'll deteriorate and blow away with the wind. And you and others were able to discover this wonderful, what would you call, treasure trove of music that was produced by this individual, this gentleman who he was the first person to ever sell 1 million copies. That just seems to me an astounding feat in and of itself.
Well, you know, Richard, my godfather, José Iturbi, yes, he was a classical musician, a classical concert pianist, as well as a conductor, and he appeared in many MGM musicals. But, you know, as you just said, he was the first musician to sell 1 million copies of a record. And, you know, you'd have thought it was Elvis Presley or the Beatles who had that distinction, but it was my godfather playing Chopin's Military Polonaise. And that's way back when, you know, 1 million copies of anything was a very big deal.
Polonaise kind of sounds like a condiment you'd find at a... First of all, where were these recordings discovered / recovered, and what was the platform?
So it was kind of exciting because they were all glass records, and it was in the RCA vaults where he had recorded. And so these had never been released. And so it's kind of fun to hear it. But as a result, because they were from the 30s and the 40s, you know, we had to digitally remaster them so that they would sound good for today. And it literally sounds, unless it's a live recording, it sounds like from a concert hall with applause. It does sound like he's sitting next to you at the piano in your own living room.
The thing that astounds me is the variety of platforms that have been created to record primarily sound. We could get into the talkies and all that kind of stuff, the films, but we're talking here now about audio, which is I want to say, I say this humbly because I still have a lot to learn, even though I've been doing this for 44 years. It's like there's been wire and wax cylinders, and now I didn't even know that there were glass recordings, glass discs.
Yes.
Wow.
And before the vinyl. So it's so interesting, you know, as you said, how through the decades, the technology has changed. I won't say improved, even though it has, but the whole concept has changed. And you have to appreciate, to be able to find these recordings from once upon a time, and how we spent the time, thanks to Sony Classical Records, to digitally remaster all of these recordings.
So first of all, how many? What are we talking about in terms of numbers? And are they all glass disc recordings, or was there any other platform? Is this primarily it that was in the vault?
No, glass and vinyl. Glass is from the earliest days.
Okay.
And then it transitioned to vinyl.
I still would love to meet the person whose mind came up with the idea of, first of all, putting it on wire, then on wax cylinders, and now you tell me on glass, let alone, I still don't comprehend the concept of vinyl. I mean, I've seen the videos, I've watched them. My father understands it. And then audio tape, and the magnetic impulses and so forth. And now it's digital, zeros and ones and so forth. My mind boggles at that kind of creativity, if you will. Let's talk a little bit. First of all, we'll get into the story of Jose, but I want to find out a little more about the platform. When how much time, what in minutes and seconds, if you will, does a glass recording hold, and is it on both sides? Is there an A and a B side?
Oh, that's a really good question, and that's above my pay grade.
Okay.
I am thrilled to have been the keeper of glass recordings and still have them, but you have to gingerly even just look at them. You don't dare touch them.
Okay.
So I have no idea.
All right. And are you familiar at all, or were you involved in any way, or did you observe that process? Because I have to believe that there weren't any players in existence, or if there were, they had to be in the vault with those discs in order to be able to play them.
Well, that's all very good, and that's really great questions, I have to say, and I would love to know the answers too. I'm just so thrilled about the end result, to be able to have these recordings now so clear, no more cracks, no more wobbling, no more missing moments, it all put together.
Well, Didi, we're going to continue this conversation. Again, as you can hear in my voice, I'm thrilled with this fact, because I'm going through the same process, not with glass, but with reel to reel, and going back 40 years, and not almost 80, going back 80 years. Wow. Incredible. Stay tuned, folks. We are talking with Didi Dadigan, and we're talking about a most incredible compendium, as I mentioned before, and it does have to do with these incredible recordings we'll talk a little bit more about, but we will also talk about the life and times of José Iturbi. And it's From Hollywood to the World, and it is the Rediscovered Records by pianist and conductor José Iturbi, in a richly illustrated 16-book edition. It's got 16 CDs, I should say, not 16 books. And you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is really a pleasure to have Dee Dadigan with us here on the program to talk about the life and times of her godfather. I have to wonder who might be even considered to be the godfather, if you will, of modern recorded audio in terms of music. I mean, and you mentioned a piece of music that he, part of what he sold 1 million, he was the first one to sell 1 million records of. Was his forte classical music, or was it many different genres?
Oh, well, Richard, I have to say he was a classical concert pianist and a conductor by profession. And when he appeared in the MGM musicals, he continued to play classical music, sometimes a little bit of popular music. He was able to go back and forth between all the different genres of music, but he was a classically trained artist, and he was most famous for his classical piano and conducting orchestras.
Now, you made reference just a couple of minutes ago before we got started about how there is a refurbishing of one of his pianos.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, we're just in the process of having it retuned, and it's a wonderful 9-foot concert grand Baldwin piano. And my godfather chose this piano, and it was actually custom built for him with the type of action that he liked, the sound that he liked, the brilliance that he liked, the repetitiveness with the key that he liked, and on and on and on. So it's like a custom piano, almost like, you'd have a car, but you want to customize it with all the different options. And, oh, by the way, I don't like the stitching color on the seat. Can I have it changed? Or can I have the different piping around it? And tell me about that engine. How many horsepowers, and how many cylinders? Hey, can we make that engine have more horsepower? And how can we accomplish that? And so my godfather was easily one of the most recognized concert pianists of his era, of his time. And in the mid 20th century, he was certainly the most well-known. And I have to say, whatever his wish was, that was the command of Baldwin Piano Company.
Baldwin is a pretty famous and renowned name when it comes to making pianos. The thing that has always astounded me, again, the creativity of the instrument makers and creators as to the different pianos there are out there. There's the grand and there's the upright. You hear the ones like they played in the saloons in the Old West, and so on and so forth, that it's still a piano, but it's a different sound. That's just incredible to me. And it sounds to me like he had a lot to work with, because even back then, there was still already a lot to work with in terms of the variety of, let's say, pianos.
So true. And in my godfather's time, there were only very few electronic pianos. So most of them were the pianos that we recognize from Once Upon a Time that performed classical and popular music, but not from rock bands and whatnot, no amplified music. So these were all pianos that the sound you heard was natural. It had all to do with what the artist was able to bring out and to pull out of that instrument using their own talents to do so. So for me, it's very exciting that we have restored this piano, and we're just having it tuned up right now again. And it's very exciting.
Do you know who will have the honor of playing it for the first time? I don't mean the tuner, because obviously the tuner has to play it. But in terms of, let's say, I don't know, maybe a concert or a recital, or I suppose, what will it be put in a museum? What will be the disposition of this grand? And I say that not as it's not a grand piano, but this piano. What will be the disposition?
Well, we're thrilled because we're tuning it for a very special performance with Michael Feinstein, who was the co-producer and the writer of the essay that is the coffee table book. And Michael Feinstein is a very well-known musician, a pianist, and accompanist. He is the ambassador of the American Songbook, and it's just thrilling. He's going to perform on it. Charlie Fox, who is a Grammy and Emmy award-winning composer and songwriter, he wrote Killing Me Softly.
Mm.
And,
Yep.
He'll be performing on it also. And I'll be playing a few notes too.
I could never do that because I took a year of piano lessons when I was in the 8th grade. My teacher was a Mrs. Granary.
Oh my
And
goodness, you remember her name?
I remember her name. And it was Ode to Joy was the one song that I was trying to learn. It was the one song she always taught her first year students.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I don't play the piano today. I know what the notes are and the black and white keys refer to, but beyond that, I will let others with greater expertise do that. The same as with those who play the guitar. I can't get my hand around the neck of the guitar. My father played the ukulele and he had no problem, but I'll just sing. Okay. I'll just use my voice. But I want to ask you, when you pulled up these recordings, you started listening to them. Were they all just instrumental, or were there some instrumental with vocals that we can enjoy as well, of people who accompanied him?
No, they're mostly instrumental because these are his classical recordings.
Okay.
He loved to accompany all of his friends, and that included Frank Sinatra,
Mm.
Judy Garland, and the likes of all these wonderfully famous and popular musicians and artists of the time.
I want to dive into another. I'm going to go a little deeper into your godfather as we continue. We're talking with Dee Dadigan, and she is sharing with us From Hollywood to the World, or From Hollywood to the World. It's a 16 CD. We'll call it a coffee table book as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Dee Dadigan is with us here on the program. And we're talking about the great work of her father, her godfather. I want to talk about your godfather now in terms of, I don't remember who my godparents were. Okay. I was way too young to have really known who they were. And I don't recall them ever hanging around the house. I mean, they may have, but I'm not recalling. What about your first recollections of your godfather?
Well, Richard, that's so interesting that you say that, because most of my friends, I know their relationship and their experiences with their godparents. And I was so thankful. My godfather was like a father to me. Sadly, my father passed away when I was young, and my godfather just stepped right in and gave me those worldly lessons that you don't get out of a school book. You didn't go to college to learn those lessons.
Yeah.
He taught me true lessons of life. And I was so thankful because my godparents were not the sort where on my birthday I had a lovely birthday card with a $5 check or a $5 bill enclosed in it, and the same thing during the holidays. And it didn't hurt that we all lived very close to each other. And my godfather took enough interest in me that I would visit him whenever he was in town from his concert tours. I would come and visit him in the afternoons and early evening. So I'm fortunate. He truly enjoyed being my godfather, I think.
Well, you'd like to think that, your parents, your godparents, or any of these folks that hung around, they like to be around you, and I would probably agree in that respect. But as you got older, were you aware of what it was that he did and how important it was to him that he do what he was doing? Because it sounds to me like he was, as we talk a lot on this program about, he was living out his life's purpose.
Well, that again is another interesting question. You're a fabulous interviewer, Richard. I knew my godfather was this pianist that toured the world and performed all over. And I knew he must have been very important based on the way other people treated him and how they regarded him and how they addressed him. But with me, he was just like a father figure, and there were no barriers, and we were very close, and we shared a lot of fun stories between each other and a lot of jokes, so much so that, in front of other people, he would sound very serious, and then he'd turn and look at me, and even when I was 7, 8 years old, 9 years old, he'd turn and look at me and then wink. And I knew that it was a big joke, and I would just stand there, like the dutiful child that doesn't say anything until spoken to. But I have to say, when I was young, my godfather was a nocturnal individual, so he loved to be up all night long, and probably with the time difference from California, from Los Angeles to the world, it could be 3 hours, 9 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, different from major capitals around the world. And so he was never a morning person. And so when I would come over in the afternoon, he had just maybe gotten up and gotten dressed, and I would appear, and then I'd have a little piano lesson with him, and that was all about Donelle learning to play and take the different discussions and improve myself right on the spot and correct whatever it was that I was doing. And then his buddies would come over, his cronies would appear, and usually it was 4 of them. And that was because they loved to play cards.
Mm-hmm.
And they all, in those days, in the 60s and 70s, they all smoked cigars and cigarettes and pipes, and they all had a highball, and they played cards. And, it was quite something. I remember all of this. And I remember when it would come a moment where he'd say, "Now, everyone, Donelle is going to play for us." And they'd all stop talking. They'd put their cocktail glasses down. They'd put their pipes and cigars and cigarettes down, and I'd play 2 or 3 line little piece because I was very young, and they would all applaud so sweetly. And then at that time, after that, I would make a curtsy, and then all the men would go back to playing their cards and talking about the world and everything, and drinking and smoking. And my godfather had taught me to walk around the table and check out what's in the deck of cards, the hand of cards that every man had in front of them. And if it was the king, I would do this. If it was a queen, I would do this. If there was a heart in it, I would do this. It was very funny. And I was so young, I had no idea, Richard, that I was helping my godfather in some way, possibly cheat. I had no idea.
Oh, heavens. Yeah, in the Old West, there'd be a gun battle.
Oh, there would have been. And all of my godfather's cronies, they were either old-time actors, entertainers, conductors, musicians, all well-known individuals. It's kind of amazing when you look back on it and think that as a child being in the presence of these individuals, but at that time I had no idea who they were.
Mm. Well, Donelle Dadigan is my guest, and we are talking about this wonderful book, and it's exciting. And it covers, first of all, it covers 20 years of his career, which I would guess is pretty much his whole career. But am I correct in reading correctly here that it is his entire library on these 16 CDs?
No, it is certainly not.
Okay.
It is some of the most popular pieces, and his career was more than half a century.
Well, maybe what I was reading, and I'm actually looking for that little blurb here.
Vaults. Those are the lost recordings in the vaults.
Yeah, from RCA Victor.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Like I said before, who knows what else is out there, not only from your godfather, but from other people as well that we haven't heard from for, who knows, maybe almost a century. And by the way, I can tell you that I had an experience about 20 years ago in archival work where somebody contacted me saying, I've got this disc, this record, and I wondered if you could get it digitized. And I said, sure, send it on. It's a 78, they said.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I didn't have a 78 player at the time. So I had to do the math, and I said, okay, 78. All right. It's not exactly double 45, but the digital editing software I have, I might be able to compensate. So I played it at 45, and then I sped it up, and it was perfect.
Listen to you.
I didn't. It was
scientist.
The scientist is correct. I didn't invent it. But it was remarkable. And what it was a 78. It was green. It was a green piece of vinyl, and you could go into these booths in the 30s and pay, I don't know, 25 cents, and you could record on one side for I think it was 2 minutes. And this little kid was in there singing this song, and it's got all the scratches and so forth. They didn't want me to, they wanted it raw. They wanted it as is. So I left it as is. But it was so remarkable to be able to recover something like that. And you cannot recover everything. So I'm curious, was everything that was in the vault recoverable, or was there any damage at all to any of it? I mean, you'd think not, because it's supposedly well preserved and protected.
Well, I think you make a very good point, because not 100% is recoverable. If it were, it would be beyond belief.
Yeah.
But my godfather's library was so vast that we only used the best recordings available to create the 16 CD set of lost recordings. That's not counting all of his discography that actually was released.
That's another question that I want to dive into as well, as we continue talking with Dee Dadigan, and From Hollywood to the World, and you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. Music is an integral part of the human experience. I can speak from firsthand experience, having interviewed my parents, my late father, who passed away this year, and my mother, who will be 89 this month, actually, that we're conversing. And in it, we talked about the importance of music. Talk to us from your perspective. And obviously, it's obvious that it was important to your godfather, but how important to you is music? Could you live without it?
No. Didn't even take a breath, didn't even have to think about it. The word is absolutely not. Music is an integral part of all of our lives, whether we realize it or not. And that's why it's so important. It is just there. My godfather had a great statement, and he believed it was the international language that everyone understood. And I truly believe that it is a unifier, music, all genres of music, whatever it is, it is a unifier.
And we'll all have our likes and dislikes. My father even talked about that as he grew older, he did not like the newer music, but he loved cowboy music. Yeah. It is fascinating, the variety, but there was a comment made some years ago. It may have been one of my guests, or I may have heard it in an interview on YouTube or on television, where they were talking about the difference. And this is not going back nearly as far as the 20s and 30s and 40s. The difference between the music of today, the 21st century, versus going back maybe the 60s, 70s. And the difference is that the music of the 60s and 70s specifically, as they were talking, had a richer sound, not because of vinyl, but because of the fact that you had pop and rock artists in particular who would incorporate one of the most, you would think, sacrosanct genres, classical orchestras, to accompany them in their music. Some of the most notable of these artists of the 60s and the 70s. But you don't hear that today in the modern music. It doesn't have the fullness and the richness. Was that something that was able to be drawn out in the remastering of your godfather's music, that richness? Because again, I understand the technology of the day may not have captured that.
Well, the beauty of digitally remastering is that it doesn't bring one thing out more than another. It makes everything more clear from that original recording. And so what we hear is a very natural style orchestra with piano solo, or a very natural piano solo performance. And sometimes you almost think as though the piano is in your own living room and you're hearing someone play piano right next to you sitting on the sofa. That's how clear it is.
Wow. Again, I'm blown away by these finds. I mean, what really is a rather interesting observation on my part is when the archaeologists start digging around in the dirt and they're digging up the bones of old people. I'm going, so are you going to go to the cemetery next door where my grandfather and grandmother were buried? You're going to dig them up next? Because where's the sacredness? Where's the holiness, the respect? And I wonder about the people who were surrounded you, who were remastering these masterpieces. Is that a good word to use?
Sure.
And showing the reverence, the respect, the honor to make sure. And there was a question in that regard. Vinyl, old vinyl, you hear the clicks and the crackles and so forth. Were there those same kinds of things? I wouldn't think so on a glass recording.
Well, I never heard a glass recording that was brand spanking new. I only heard glass recordings that were used. So by that time you had the crackle and
you did
whatnot because they were used.
But what about that reverence? I'll use that word in a spiritual sense, metaphysical sense. What about having the reverence, that was, I think, due to these kinds of recordings, because yes, they're delicate. You don't even want to look at them for fear of breaking the glass. Did the folks that were doing this digital remastering, there were a number of them, you've mentioned some of them already, they were they in awe, or was it just, oh, this is a thing to do, I love doing it, but it's just my thing to do?
Well, I would hope that everyone would have a special love for this. It certainly comes out in the finished product. They're all professionals. They do this every day of the week. But to have a find of these lost recordings, and to have the find from the very old vinyl from 78s, as well as the glass discs, it's very unusual. And I know they were extremely careful and took special attention to really give it their all, to pull out the sound as much as they could.
Mm. My father, as I was growing up, had a vacuum tube amplifier.
Oh my, yes.
With a turntable that was separate. It was in its own wooden box on legs. The one speaker that went along with this set it had to have been 4 feet, 3.5 to 4 feet tall. And it was triangular to accommodate the giant cone speaker inside. And I absolutely loved listening. But I've also talked with people when the CD age came along, and they said they would never, ever, ever buy a CD because it doesn't have the warmth. Now, there was no other way to recover these recordings but digitally. Were they able to, and it kind of ties into the question I asked earlier, they were able to incorporate or bring out that warmth of let's just say the glass or vinyl recordings to where it really would touch you?
Well, I would hope so, because so many people who have purchased this album and have listened to these recordings say it's as though José Iturbi's fingers were on fire. It's like hearing something that is so beyond an average recording. It makes you think that you are sitting right there with the pianist. Mm. And so I have to appreciate that.
And I'm sure he traveled the world, did he not?
Yes, he did. Many times he flew his own plane.
Oh, really? Do you know what kind of plane it was?
He had several planes. One was a DC-9, that's very old.
Wow.
And a DC-3 before that. And at one time, he even took some of his orchestra members with him.
Were there any places that he traveled to perform that he enjoyed or loved being there, maybe more than others? Again, I understand that he loved playing, period. But were there locations on the planet that he just felt more at home, and it just really resonated in the music that he performed?
Well, obviously, I think his return to his native country, Spain, in Madrid, or in Spain, where he was born in Valencia, in the southern Spain areas on the Mediterranean. He loved Paris because he was a graduate of the Paris Music Conservatory and lived there. He loved performing in Geneva because he was with the Geneva Music Conservatory. When he was teaching there, when he first started his career, after graduating from the Paris Music Conservatory, he held the Franz Liszt chair. It was a very big deal for him. So he loved being in Switzerland. He loved England. He loved London. He loved Germany. He loved Munich. He loved Frankfurt. He loved New York City. Oh my goodness, Carnegie Hall. He loved performing in Washington, D.C. with several presidents. He loved in San Francisco. He loved to perform in Los Angeles. He was a man of the world. What can I say?
Carnegie Hall, of course. If you get to play there, you have made it, my friend. That's what they say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In terms of the different pianos that he played? Was there one in particular that he really did enjoy playing, that gave him the sound that he really wanted, or did it really depended upon the composition that he was playing and or conducting?
Well, let's break that down. So break that question down.
All right. Was there a particular favorite piano that he liked to play?
Well, he was a Baldwin piano man. Originally, when he
Sure.
came to the United States, he was a Steinway man, and then he became a Baldwin man. And because Baldwin was American and he loved everything American. This was his new home, his new country, and so he loved that.
But was there a type of Baldwin that he liked more than others? A grand, baby grand, upright, or did that depend upon what he was performing?
No, not at all. He was a Baldwin 9-foot concert grand man, and he had those in his home also. He was a concert pianist, so he was very comfortable playing on concert grands.
When you listen, when we all listen to music, we get different feelings, and a lot of times different feelings at different times. I pulled up, for example, for an audition that I'm presenting, I pulled up the song Isle of Hope and Isle of Tears by Sheehan McKean, I believe is his name. A fine Irishman, I might add.
Yes.
When I first pulled it up and I'm listening to it as in terms of preparing to and thinking about, okay, is this the song I want? I'm starting, and from the very first words, on the first day of January, and I'm listening to it, I'm starting to cry. But the more I listen to it over and over again and sing along with it over and over again, that kind of goes by the wayside. The emotion's still there. Don't get me wrong. It still hits me, but at least the tears aren't flowing. And that's not going to work real well when you're performing, because you can't sing and cry at the same time. Were there particular compositions, or again, I understand it was all classical music, but there are all kinds of classical music. And he obviously was a composer as well. That touched him. Did you ever notice that when he would play that maybe the emotions would come?
Well, I think, a concert pianist never allows the music to get the best of them. And whatever there was, it came out in the way they performed. And so that is how it came out, not with tears coming out of their eyes. Or rolling down their cheeks, but in the quality of their performance and the nuances of their performance.
I would venture there's got to be some video, some film footage of him.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of it. You can find it on YouTube, and it's very exciting, whether he's performing in sold out concert halls or on Bell Telephone Hour or from one of his MGM musicals that he starred in. There's lots for everyone to take a look at.
A lot for us to learn too. I'm curious as to, I don't want to make an assumption, so I'm going to ask the question. What was his faith? What was the faith that he followed that fed him and propelled him forward in his passion?
That's a great question. He always thought of others, and he thought how others would respond. And he was never satisfied with the first go round of anything, even if it was well received by his throngs of fans. It was always something that made him want to improve and to delve further into his music and the interpretation of it, which I think is what made him such a concert great and what made him have legions of fans, because they always knew he gave it his all. Maybe made it look simple and made it look easy, which is part of it. No one wants to see you working hard at your craft. And he had tremendous charisma, so he was able to project the wonders of the music, not only with the sound, but with his appearance.
There was a story of scientists who were conducting an experiment and they got the result they wanted, but they needed to do it several times so they could get the same result. But they got a different result every time. And it wasn't for a while until they finally discovered, oh, wait a minute, we're affecting the result of the experiment. That is the same scenario, if you will, in music as well. You can play the same piece over and over again, but it's never going to be the same twice. And I have to say that must, there has to be a certain element of thrill, and that's why throngs of people are connoisseurs of his music, because you're never, even if you hear the same piece 500 times, you're never going to hear it the same, because not only has Jose changed, he's grown, he's evolved, so have you. And you've had new experiences. You see that come out as well? You see that? Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. And it's that human element that is part of the music listening experience and concert going experience, that you may be listening to pieces that you recognize, but each time they're performed, it's a little bit different. Either the way that the concert artist has performed them, or the way you, the concert goer, perceives them because of how you are at that point in your life.
I am always astounded by individuals' abilities to play certain instruments. I'm lucky enough to be able to play the voice, my own voice. I've had lessons in violin, in piano, in the recorder, and also in high school band, I was the baritonist. But none of that stuck. None of it stuck, at least as far as the instrument is concerned. But I surprised someone not long ago when we were working on a song that I was writing, and they said, really, you know about the whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and how they look, and on the bass and treble clef, and so on and so on. I says, well, yeah, I learned that in grade school music class. But a lot of people, they don't have that. I mean, they don't even sing, let alone play an instrument. What is your advice to them, having had a godfather like you had, who I'm sure has a major influence in your musical aspirations or your expressions, to find a way to create your own, I could say song, but your own music?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, Richard. I think that everyone, whether they sing or they don't sing, they can read music, they don't read music. Music is to be enjoyed any way that you're able to and you want to. Mm-hmm. Whether you like to listen to it on the radio, whether you like to listen to it only in live concert, whether you like to listen to it in a CD collection or in your car or through your smartphone. It's all about enjoyment. So however it is that you can derive a pleasure, that's how you have to do it, because music is all about pleasure, bringing enjoyment to you in our all too short lives.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? We're around, as I've said, we're around for less than a puff of smoke. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. So, and I do believe, like you, we're here to enjoy ourselves, to experience joy and so forth, and pleasure and peace and all of those different attributes that come along with it. I mean, I think about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Are you pursuing happiness is sort of the question I put out to our listeners. But what about you? Have you found your happiness, and have you been in it because of your godfather?
Well, I have pursued happiness my entire life because I believe that is the key. And when you enjoy what you do, it's no longer work. It is actually a pleasure. And because you enjoy it so much, you no longer count minutes or hours. You just do it till you get it completed, or where you want your job to be done, or whatever it is that you want to have accomplished, you're able to do it. You lose track of time. You lose track of how much effort you've put into it. It's all about the end result and how much fun and pleasure you've had along the way to get to that point.
Mm. Well, I can tell you that I have been in that space a good part of the past 44 years in this business.
Congratulations. Bravo.
Well, my father, who, as I say, just passed away this past March 1st, he gave me a piece of advice that, in a way, I was already following, but it was nice that it was sort of reinforced by him. He says, you need to find something that you love doing because you're going to be doing it for a long time. Don't get stuck like me. Now, that last part, he didn't, because he did go to junior college and got his computer programming degree. I was fortunate at the age of 19 to find a radio station that I got my start in. And to me, it's the ultimate format. It's a radio reading service for blind and visually impaired people. And now it's available online. I mean, it's incredible what's happened in the last 44 years in that regard. And I've often felt, and this is kind of what goes into this archival work that you folks have been doing and that I do as well. We have every right to choose what we want to listen to in this case, in terms of music. Nobody has the right to tell us, oh, I'm sorry. You know the phrase back in the 60s and 70s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and rock and roll is the devil's music. Are you kidding me? That's what they said about classical music during Mozart and Beethoven's time, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
You are absolutely correct.
And when I had a discussion with the manager of the Christian radio station I was working for, and we were talking about the printing in Braille of Hugh Hefner's magazine, Playboy, and they were trying to get Congress to defund that element, I said, okay, let me ask you a question. You get to walk into a bookstore, you get to look up and down the shelves, and you can choose a book you want to read based upon the color, the text and font of the book, the feel of it. If you open it up and read a few paragraphs, oh, I like this, I'm going to buy this. The blind and visually impaired don't have that right. They don't have that privilege. And now you are telling them what they can and cannot read. And I took it one step further. I said, okay, if Hefner wants to pay for it, which I'm sure he had the money to do, then maybe they should make a subscription. But that isn't the way it's set up right now. The Library of Congress prints it in Braille. There are no pictures. So do they have the basic human rights and civil rights to read what they want to read in whatever format, Braille, large print, or audible? Or are you going to take that away from them? And believe it or not, I think that hit a chord with him. And it's the same thing with music. You talked earlier about how, all genres of music are a wonderful treat for the senses.
Absolutely.
What is on the horizon following this? I know you're obviously getting the piano tuned. I get that. But what is on the horizon in terms of maybe releasing any more of these recordings, even though they weren't the pristine stuff? I don't know if they have to be further remastered and cleaned up or whatever the case might be, or if you find any more anywhere else.
Well, for the José Iturbi Foundation, it's about popularizing classical music one note at a time. And it's about teaching young generations and future generations the enjoyment of listening to classical music. And one way of doing that is mating very popular songs of today, their melodies, and finding if you can find a possible hint of that melody in a classical music piece. And we do this by presenting blockbuster, great artists in these wonderful concerts, playing very popular classical music that are always sold out because it's a great artist and a great composition and great melodies. And we have young people coming to these concerts who it might be even their first concert that they've ever attended. And little by little, they start to enjoy this thing called classical music. And it's so good for the senses and the soul. And it helps young people learn so much more, whether it be mathematics, science, whatever, because there's a learning process in everything that we do. And when you enjoy what you're doing and learning, you don't realize you're learning something. You're just enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the goal.
There was a class in third or fourth grade. I'm amazed I remember this stuff. I don't remember the music teacher's name, unfortunately. Anyway, but there was.
You remembered your third grade teacher.
I remembered my third grade teacher, Mrs. Thomas, gorgeous redhead. I've always loved redheads ever since, but that's another story for another program. In the music class, they had what was called music memory. And this is how it worked. You would be listening to different classical music, classical pieces. And you were given all kinds of information about the composer and the background of this music that was being listened to, what it was created for. And because a lot of times in those days, these composers were commissioned to write pieces for maybe the church and so forth. And you would memorize, or at least you would recognize the piece of music, and you could call out its name and its composer and so forth. And it went on for a semester where the whole idea was, at the end of the semester, if you had remembered by listening to each of those pieces, the information associated with them, composer and so forth, you got to go to one of the great halls, Grady Gamage Auditorium in Tempe, Arizona on the ASU campus, to listen to the Phoenix Symphony Orchestra play those pieces. So you got out of school for one. You got to go to an incredible place. Oh my heavens. I've been in there a couple of times. And you got to listen to some incredible music and musicians play. Did you ever have anything like that when you were in school, or did you even need it because of your godfather?
Oh, what a great question, Richard. We had music appreciation and it was so enjoyable. But no, we had no field trips, but I had better than a field trip. I had my godfather that I could just go over to his house and watch him. And sometimes we'd play two piano together. So it was a wonderful experience.
Did you ever, I'm curious, speaking of which, did you ever learn to play a four-handed piece on the same piano with your godfather?
Yes, I did. And my first piano teacher was my godfather's sister. And I learned four-hand performance playing with my piano teacher, his sister, Amparo Iturbi, who was a fabulous concert pianist in her own right. And then later on, I would do that every so often with my godfather. So it was very much fun.
This is phenomenal, what's available these days. And I've seen some incredible playing on a wide variety of instruments I'm familiar with, and others I have never seen before. I swear the aliens brought them to Earth. But I've seen people playing the piano, and this kind of struck me. I'm curious if you ever learned how to play. Let's just say you played the right hand, and your godfather or someone else played the left hand of the same piece of music, because that takes an incredibly creatively wired brain to be able to do that.
Well, it certainly does. And the answer is no, I have not done that. But as you are speaking about that, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what strength, mental strength, acuity, and the ability to hear only yourself and not be able to hear the entire melody or the piece, but just what you're playing with one hand. Oh my goodness, that must be extraordinary. Have you ever done that?
No. I haven't done that, not with a piano. I've done it with a broadcast console where I've got one person over on one side running the microphones and I'm running the audio from the different sources coming in. That's about as close as I've gotten. But it's always a lot of fun. And that's the one thing that I have lived by. I actually had a job outside of this industry where I was in sales. And here's the irony. Number one, I hated that job, in spite of the fact that as a teenager, I was a paper boy and I loved that job, even going out and knocking on doors for subscriptions. And I was regularly the high salesman. I still have all of the certificates for the months that I was a high salesman. But this job here 17 years ago, I hated this. It was incoming calls. We were selling this booklet for people to buy cars, kind of like Auto Trader. And I was high salesman in that too, as much as I hated it. The last 2 weeks, I was in the special room that was raised above. We got served lunch instead of having to go out and get it. I mean, it was wonderful. And it's like, wait a minute, you're so good at this. How is it that you hate it so much? You need to embrace that. Aren't we all kind of selling? I mean, in a matter of speaking, we are. I mean, you're not here selling the book directly per se, but you're sharing your godfather's love and your love for your godfather's music, and you want other people to hear it.
Well, isn't that the truth? You know, it's about sharing these wonderful experiences. And I find it so interesting that so many people from a generation older than ourselves recognize and know the name José Iturbi. It's our generation and younger our generation that maybe knows that name, or any of the names, whether it's Vladimir Horowitz or Heifetz or Artur Rubinstein, they're all great musicians, but of a certain era. So the younger we get with our generations, the better, you know, it is that we recognize the value and the importance of what classical music is about, and how do we extend it to these newer generations. And I believe my godfather, José Iturbi, figured it out. That's why he did these wonderful MGM musicals. It wasn't because he was in love with wanting to become an actor. It's because he recognized the value of the motion picture and all these young people who flocked to see all these movies. And at the same time, it turned out that the movie studios were looking for a way to bring more culture to the medium of motion pictures. And so they thought, we should have some opera singers, you know, Mario Lanza, we should have some great performers, musical instruments, you know, José Iturbi. And this is why Frank Sinatra became so popular in the movies, because he, of course, was a singer many years before he became appeared in movies. But it's all of that opportunity to bring culture. And so I think about that, and I think, you know, my godfather was a very smart man in recognizing the value of each of these entertainment mediums, whether it was a live performance, whether it was recording, whether it was motion picture, and ultimately television. And as a result, getting these young people who love to go to movies to see José Iturbi in like Anchors Away with Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly, you know, it's fun. So they would want to now come and see maybe José Iturbi in performance. And this is how, you know, he had so many fans, all these young girls and young women. They were called Bobby Soxers. You know, Frank Sinatra had them also. Of course, those are young people who enjoyed popular music. My godfather was young people who enjoyed classical music, and women would throw scented handkerchiefs up on stage and flowers at him. And he enjoyed that, and that helped promote and perpetuate the enjoyment of classical music to a future generation.
Yeah, better that than today, where people are throwing their undergarments up there. We just don't need that. You raised another thing that I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up here, and I'm going to ask it in the way that you phrased it. What is classical music all about?
Well, you know, what is classical music all about? I mean, a lot of people ask that question, but when you learn about it when you're younger and you hear the melodies and you recognize the composers, it's just music to you. And in fact, all forms of music are just music. And then there's specifics that you may like or dislike, or you may enjoy more than others. But for me, classical music is a way to take me from the realities of daily life into a nice respite, a moment of relaxation and enjoyment, and maybe taking me away from the day-to-day travail.
There are two, I guess I could call them classical singers, that I had the privilege of being in their presence at a performance. One of them was in Phoenix, Placido Domingo.
Oh, yes.
And the other was, I think it was, she was on her, what they called harem tour, called Sarah Brightman.
Yes.
Oh my heavens, what a not only a great singer, very agile, because she came flying from the ceiling. I was really impressed.
I did not know that.
Oh my.
Nice.
What those two people in particular. And then of course I've had the privilege of sitting in the Granada Theater here in Santa Barbara, California, where I live. And they did a concert of Mahler's, I believe they refer to it Mahler's Fifth, but that's not what the violinists call it. They call it the Hurt Locker. If you're familiar with Mahler's Fifth, it is very, I thought at first, is Mahler schizophrenic? Because this thing keeps changing and I wish he would stick with, but it was magnificent. It was wonderful. The creativity that's out there is incredible. And your godfather obviously had incredible creativity. Final question on this, do you think that he was a man before, ahead of his time, or was he right where he needed to be in that time between the 30s and 60s?
Oh, that's a great question, Richard. He was right where he needed to be at the exact perfect right time to help so many people enjoy the world of classical music, whether he was on USO, war bond tours with his fellow entertainers, whether he was performing to sold out concert halls, whether he was, recording music with for people to be able to purchase and take home and hear on their record players, as we talked about earlier. And he was very happy to be doing what he was doing.
Well, we're happy that he was doing it too. And I am going to let our listeners know and our viewers, we're going to incorporate some of his music from this 16 CD set into this program, into this conversation that we've been having here with Judy Dadigan. And she is the goddaughter of Jose Iturbi. And you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And Dee Dee, I have 3 final questions I ask all of my guests. All right. And some have said, and you saved these for last? Yes, I have. However, before I ask those questions, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We stream live at those times at richarddugan.com, and the podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. And we are on YouTube, yes, where you can watch these interviews. We hope you'll subscribe and click notification so that when a new conversation is posted, you will be able to listen to it. We also ask that if you are able to do so to support this work financially that we are doing, we have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. They'll ask you for an email address, richard@richarddugan.com. That's my email address to whom you will be sending the support to. And we thank you for those who have, and thank you for those who will. And one final thing, what we want you to do during this, the decade of perfect vision, if you're not listening to José Iturbi's music, then listen to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm place. You might even hear Jose playing the piano. And listen to the inspiration, the encouragement, the education, the direction. That's what it's there for. And with all of that being said, let me ask of my guest the first of 3 questions. And the first of those 3 questions is, who is Donelle Dadigan?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. We'll need a whole hour for that. What's the next question? And even that won't cover it. So go on.
All right. Well, we'll go to the next one. We'll accept that as an answer, believe it or not. What is your life's purpose?
Oh, that's a great question too. And I suppose it's to educate and entertain as many people as I come in contact with.
I may know the answer to this question, although that would be my intuition giving me the answer. And I hope you recognize the movie reference. What was your best day?
Every day is my best day. That's what keeps me moving.
Well, Donelle, I want to thank you again for joining us here on the program and sharing your godfather's work with us. And we will continue to share it throughout the weeks, months, and years, and look forward to whatever else the universe has for you to offer.
Thank you, Richard. It's been a real pleasure spending the afternoon with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, I know you're happy. And Smokey, I'll see you on down the road.